Well, I told Pastor Mike this morning that if I had an hour or so, I could do this text pretty well. And he said, we don't have that. He says, I got you about 10 minutes. I'm going to talk about the conclusion of the text for the day. I'm going to talk about forgiveness. One of the things that I like to do in terms of describing the church is to point out that we are, as the Church of Jesus Christ, we are not the gathering of the righteous, but we are the community of the forgiven. Now, it's also been said that a Christian is one who forgives the unforgivable in another because God has forgiven the unforgivable in us. I like that as well, but I know that sets the bar pretty darn high. And for me, I don't always get over that bar. It's hard to forgive when somebody has really hurt us. It's hard to forgive when we continue to feel the effects of the pain that's been inflicted upon us. One of the things I have learned through the years is that forgiveness is a gift that is given. And I remember the many times I have been forgiven. And I see the effect, I see the healing power of forgiveness. You know, I remember back when I was a young pastor 4 or 5 years ago. And I'll get to the punchline. Well, it was maybe a few more. But it was back when I was young. My oldest son, Rick, was like 5. Okay? And it had become his practice during those years to look for his father to come home about the same time in the afternoon. And he'd be waiting there at the front door for me. He'd be looking through the screen door, looking for his dad to come up the driveway. And I did, as typical, but it's one of those days, you know. I mean, people have been on me all day. And I came in thinking, man, I can't do anything right. And it's frustrating as the dickens, and I just had it right up to here. And I pull in the driveway, and I see him there at the front door, and he is just literally bouncing up and down. He can hardly wait for me to walk in the door so he can get me to play with him, right? And normally I would enjoy that. But it hit me just, you know, one more thing right then. And I walk in, he goes, Dad, you know, he's jumping around. Rick, give me a moment. And as soon as I said, you know, one of those words back, it was poorly done. But he was already turning and running, crying, into the kitchen. And I knew I couldn't follow him. I knew because I knew that my wife was in that kitchen. And that would not go well. So I was in the living room, I laid down on the couch, you know, just, woe is me, what a rotten day, all that stuff, you know, and boy, I can't do anything right. After a couple of moments, the crying stopped in the other room. And I thought, maybe I should risk it. No, that's bad. And so I waited and kind of watched, and after a moment there was this little head that peeked around the corner of the dining room and peeked into the living room to see if I'd take his head off again. And when I didn't, he came on around, Rick came on around, and he had this big cookie that Allison, no doubt, bribed him with. And he gingerly walks over to it, you know? And he breaks the cookie in half. He says, Dad, you want half of my cookie? And you know, within 10 seconds, I'm down on the floor playing with him as I should have been from the beginning, right? That gift of grace, undeserved. I certainly didn't deserve it, but given out of love, that gift of grace brought the relationship back where it should have been. I couldn't have fixed it right then. At least I didn't know how right then. But the gift of grace made it whole once more. That's the way God works toward us again and again. That's what forgiveness does for us. You know, the real question is not whether forgiveness heals. We feel that effect. But the real question, it seems to me, is how do we get that done? It's hard. Like I said, it's hard to forgive. When we still wear the scars, it's hard to forgive the person that put it there. I've said before that I relate to Peter. Big guy, puts his foot in his mouth often, but tries to do the right thing. And I identified with him here. He's asking, how often do I have to do this? I mean, what's reasonable here? And how do we begin to approach forgiving someone who has hurt us? Well, to me, there are a few things that just help me a little bit. One is to remember that to forgive is not to deny the pain that has been caused or the wrongness of the act that has taken place. It's not to excuse what was unjust or hurtful, nor is it to tolerate abuse. Remember what Jesus has said in this text already. He says, if somebody wrongs you, go and address that wrong, face to face. And by the way, that often works. And poor Peter, here he is, he says, how many times? As many as 7 times. He thought that was pretty darn high. It was kind of, 7 was the perfect number for the Jews. And if you think about it, if somebody has wronged you again and again, how often would 7 times be a lot? Yeah, you betcha. 7 times is a lot. But Jesus said, well, no, not 7 times. 77 times. Or 7 times 70. The translators aren't sure what that formula was, but it's an outrageous number. That's what we get at. It's an outrageous number. And how can we possibly do that? Well, the point of this outrageously high number is this, that Jesus is saying that to forgive is not a matter of, it's not a quantitative issue, but it is a qualitatively different way of living. That we would forgive, that we would work toward bringing community back into effect. Jesus tells us it's not a quantifiable commodity, it's a qualitatively different way of living. It's drawn from the very being of God, whose nature is to be gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abiding in steadfast love, and his goal always is the restoration of the community. See, forgiveness is not designed to make everything okay again. It's designed to open up a future that the past has closed off. But in forgiveness, suddenly that future opens up once more. You know, I don't like to tell stories that are somebody else's stories very much anymore. I like to tell my own stories, you know that. And once you get to a certain maturity, you have a lot of stories to tell. Well, this time I'm going to tell you a story from somebody else. Corrie ten Boom. She was a Dutch Christian back in World War II. She, along with her father and family members, they helped many Jews escape the Holocaust of the Nazis during World War II. And they were finally captured. They were imprisoned. And her sister died at that camp. She tells this story. She also wrote a well-known book called The Hiding Place. Maybe you read it a long time ago. Maybe not. But she tells the story. It was in a church in Munich that I saw him. A balding, heavy-set man with a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched in his hand. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken, moving along the pews, heading toward the back door. But this one came toward me. He came toward me and stood right in front of me. And she recognized him. The man who stood before her, she recognized as a guard from that concentration camp, where she had been held, where her sister died. He came forward to her and he thanked her for her message of forgiveness. She had come to tell the people of Germany that God forgives. He'll forgive anything, she said. And he thanked her profusely for her speech. And he told her very frankly of his sin, that he had been a guard in a concentration camp and had done terrible things. And he said, I have become a Christian, and I know that God forgives. I believe that. I believe he has forgiven even me. But I wanted to thank you and to come to you, make my confession, and ask you to forgive me. He didn't recognize her, but she recognized him. And he reached out his hand to shake hers. She said she stood there utterly wounded. She said there was a coldness in her heart that she could not describe. She could not move. She was just frozen in place. And she said, I prayed silently, Lord, help me. I cannot forgive this. But in a second she said, I also realized that forgiveness is also an act of will. It's not just how I feel, it's what I do. And she said, in her prayer, she said, I can raise my hand and take his, but beyond that I cannot go. And so she said very woodenly, very mechanically, she raised her hand, he took hers. She said, extraordinary thing. She said it began at her shoulder, and that there was this warmth, this feeling that came down her arm into her hand, into those clasped hands. And it brought her to tears. And she said, the words came forth, I forgive you, brother. I forgive you from my heart. For a long moment, we clasped hands. This former guard and this former prisoner, and I never had known God's love so intimately as I did in that moment. I couldn't top that story. Can you forgive someone who's truly hurt you? Corrie ten Boom's story suggests maybe not. Maybe you cannot do that. But yet God can and God does forgive. God can and God does forgive, and he strengthens us to do what we could not do on our own. We come here to the church this day to hear the word proclaimed to you, to receive the sacrament. In a moment, you'll come to the table of grace where Jesus awaits you. And he's saying to you, come, bring to me all that you have done. I love you. I love you still. I forgive you. That has real power, because that forgiveness is a new beginning, a new opportunity, not just for you, but by strengthened by God. In that sacrament, we become the community of the forgiven. We go forth, empowered by Jesus,